Welcome everyone to service. May you be blessed richly through this time. For our fourth and last message regarding the theme of this month, adventures, faith adventures, we want to look at the case of Esther. I don't know how familiar you are with the book of Esther, but by far, the book of Esther is one of the most strangest books in the Bible. Why do I say that? Because if you read very, very carefully, from the first verse to the last verse, there's one thing that is never mentioned. What is that? Any guesses? Jesus? Well, yeah, but a lot of Old Testament books don't really mention Jesus. God, yes. The name of God never appears even once in all of Book of Esther. Another interesting thing, there are no miracles, no prophets, no judges, right? Yet, entire book of Esther is filled with the feeling of providence. If you look at how Esther becomes a queen among all the women in the empire, God is never mentioned, but you know that it is the work of God, right? Mordecai, hearing about the evil plans of Haman at the right place at the right time, sounds almost too good to be true. Yet, if you look at it, and even though God is never mentioned, there's a very, very strong feeling that you get that God has placed Mordecai at the right place at the right time. If you look at how Esther, as the text suggests that we read today, it was a daunting thing for Esther to approach the king without permission, without being summoned. Yet Esther does the unthinkable. Even though God is never mentioned, his hand is all over this book. God doesn't have to announce himself to be present. The book of Esther teaches us that providence, God's hand, God's help, God's work, his miracles, don't always come with a burning bush, or parting of the sea, or breaking of the rock, or the castle, right? Sometimes he does, other times he works silently. Yet he works. That's the key word. Sometimes it comes disguised as a series of unlikely events. Sometimes an event that seems almost impossible. Until you step back, you look at the whole picture and realize that it was God all along. So here we are in a city called Susa, which is the capital city of the Persian Empire. Persia was a superpower during those days. They've probably conquered all of the known world. How was Mordecai and Esther end up living in Susa? Just like Daniel and his friend, just like Nehemiah and so many others, Mordecai and Esther were also taken from their homes as a prisoner, as a slave. It is unclear if they were born in Persia or if they were captured and brought to Persia. However, there were Jewish people living in Persia. Unlikely events took the place where Esther participated. Well, she really didn't have a choice. All the available women were to be summoned, to be looked at, to be examined, to be fit for a queen. But lo and behold, the orphan Esther, right? The slave Esther, the captive Esther, the Jewish Esther, became queen. Even that is very unlikely, yet it happened. So now she's in a very comfortable place, living in the palace. But you have to understand the whole picture. As I said, Persia was a superpower nation back then. And they certainly used their force. So that's why they defeated the Israelites and they took prisoners, and they did that to many, many, many nations. 힘이 있었고 힘을 쓰기에 주저하지 않았어요. 페르시아 왕국, 제국은. 그렇기 때문에 적이 많은 거죠. So they had a lot of enemies, right? People who lost their homes, people who lost their people, people who lost their nations. They had many, many enemies. And would it be easier to defeat the entire Persian army or to get rid of the head? Equally difficult, but it is a lot easier to assassinate the king rather than to defeat the whole Persian army. That's why the Persian king, even with his infinite power and authority, lived in fear. He has decreed that nobody can approach his inner circle unless they're summoned as a measure of safety. If you think about it, would it be easier for a foreign spy to infiltrate the inner kingdom, inner sanctum, or would it be easier for them to bribe one of the officials or the soldiers or the guards of the kingdom? Right? For a foreign spy, it's very difficult to infiltrate the king's inner circle. But it's a lot easier to bribe somebody or to threaten somebody, right? And they can do their work. Maybe if someone approached the king's chef or the cook and they were to put poison in his wine or in his food, it would be very easy to kill the king, isn't it? That's why, unless you're summoned, you cannot approach the king. And that included even the queen herself. Now, Mordecai, who we think usually is his uncle or her uncle, actually is her cousin, older cousin. 우리 흔히 뭐 삼촌이나 아저씨로 알고 있는데 사실은 사촌이에요. 나이 차이는 물론 있지만 사촌 오빠 Mordecai. Somehow, being at the right place at the right time, overhears an evil plan of one named Haman. Haman is one of the king's officials. And why was he making up an evil plan? Well, he didn't like the fact that a captive girl, a Jewish girl, would become queen. He didn't like the fact that Jewish people still served their God other than our God. He didn't like the fact that Jewish people still held on to their traditions rather than to submit to the mighty power of the Persian Empire. Many, many reasons. He just didn't like them. That's why he made a very evil plan to kill off all the Jews. But he wasn't careful. So when he talked about his plans, one person overheard it, and his name was Mordecai. Mordecai himself did not have the means to act on this, but he knew one person who could, and that was his cousin Esther. So Mordecai comes to Esther and has a conversation with her. It tells her what's going on. Now, Esther has a choice. If she approaches the king and tells him of the plan, her people might be saved. But what would happen to her? She would die because she broke the decree. If she chooses to remain in safety where she is comfortable, where she's taken care of by her maids and everything, and does nothing, she will be saved. But what would happen to Mordecai and all the other Jews? Surely they will perish. So she was in a very difficult place, trying to make that choice. She did have a way out. She was queen, right? She could remain in safety. But she did not. Position is not safety. It's purpose. Sometimes in this world, in our life, we want to achieve a certain position in life. If I make this much money, if I make that promotion becomes the VP or whatever, or department head or president or whatever the case might be, then I will be secure. 이 정도 위치에 가면, 이 정도 돈을 벌고 명성을 쌓으면 괜찮을 거야. 잘 살 수 있을 거야. Right? Is that always the same? Is that always the case? Position, my friends, is not safety. You can become the richest person in the world, or can become one person with the most authority, whatever that case might be, yet does not guarantee you safety, does not guarantee you success. Instead, you have to think position as a purpose. That was the illusion that Esther knew very well. She knew very well that she was seemingly secure as a queen. But how secure is a queen if she breaks a simple decree? Then she will be killed. Here's the interesting thing. Yes, Esther was the queen, but it is mentioned that the king did not call upon her for 30 days. What's going on? Do you think that Esther was the only queen? Then you're mistaken. Right? Back then, a king, certainly a status of the Persian Empire, would have many queens and concubines. Right? The stronger, the more that he had. That was just how it was back then. So she wasn't the only queen, she was one of the queens. Right? And the king had many other queens and concubines to visit or to call upon. So even though she was queen, her position was not really that secure, if you think about it. Also, her cousin Mordecai reminds her of a very important fact. And he says, if you stay silent, if you don't do anything about it, surely someone will step up and we will be delivered, but you will perish. And he extends an invitation saying that your placement, your position, the reason that you are queen is because it's not an accident, it has a purpose. And this is what he says. Verse 14, he says, who knows but that you have come to your position, your royal position, for such a time as this. Esther, even though she had a very difficult choice, already sort of made up her mind. Because it wasn't really a choice, if you think about it. So Esther, instead of running to the king right away, almost instinctively, she could have, but instead she calls a fast. She extends an invitation to all the Jewish people in Susa to join her in a fast for 3 days, night and day. Entire community falling on their knees for one specific reason, one specific purpose. We studied the case of Caleb. We studied the case of Gideon. We studied the case of King David. And now we're looking at Esther. People who had courage. People who acted when the time came. Courage in Scripture is not impulsive, but fearless, but prepared. What does that mean? Sometimes we think being brave or being courageous is feeling no fear and acting right away. No, that is not the case. Caleb spent more than 40 years in the desert, yet he held on to God's promise. Gideon tested God on many, many occasions. He was very cautious, yet he trusted God enough to go along with a foolish plan, right? To send home all the participants and just leave 300 warriors to face multitudes of armies. King David ran towards the giant. Was it because he was foolish? No. It wasn't because he was foolhardy. It was because he was prepared. David spent his entire childhood being a shepherd, fighting off the lions and the wolves and the bears. And he experienced, we talked about this last week, he experienced a daily miracle of God's protection every single day by being faithful to what was called for. Esther felt the same. She knew that she could perish. She knew that she could be killed. She knew that she was no hero, but she was honest. She knew of the consequences, but moved still. And she surrendered the outcome, leaving everything up to God. My friends, we know of the story. So she approaches the king, right? And before she goes, she gets ready. After 3 days and night of fasting, she gets ready. She takes a bath, washes her face, puts on makeup, best dress that she has, does the hair, entire thing, right? Her best appearance, and she approaches the king. And the king could have easily get rid of her, but being reminded of who Esther is, how faithful, how beautiful, how nice she is, the king extends his scepter, giving her the one pardon that she needs. And she tells the king of the evil plan, and the king disposes of Haman the same way that he planned to kill all the Jews. So vengeance takes place. And Esther, Mordecai, and the rest of the Israelites, Jewish people, are saved through the courageousness, through the obedience, through the readiness of one single person. What did these people have in common? Caleb, Gideon, David, Esther. Yes, they believed in God. Yes, they trusted God. One thing that they shared in common was no matter how difficult, no matter how impossible what they were seeing or what they were facing, they did not let it get to them. Why? Because they understood that God was bigger than any of the enemy that they were facing. My friends, in life sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes we get the feeling that we're at the right place at the right time. 흔하진 않지만 살다 보면 그런 경험을 하실 때가 있을 거예요. 내가 이 자리에 이때에 내가 있는 것은 이유가 있구나. Right? It just feels right. Right? You know, wow, I didn't know why, but God works in a mysterious way. It's using me, right? Sometimes you feel we're at the right place at the right time. However, more often than not, we feel out of place. We don't know why we're here. Even worse, 단순히 모르는 걸 넘어서서 내가 있는 자리, 내가 있는 위치가 왜 그런지 불평을 합니다. We complain with the position that we're in. God, why am I having this kind of difficulty in my life? Why did you put me in a place such as this? So many times, my friends, we turn to God and say, put me in a better place. Right? Put me in a better position. Make me more successful. Make me more money. Right? Make me more successful. As if that would solve all our problems. Yes, success helps. Money helps. Reaching a certain position in life helps. But that's not everything, is it? You're asking for the wrong things. You're asking, you're looking at a different thing. What we should be asking is, God, I know that it's difficult. I know my situation isn't the best, but I know that I am here because you have put me here. And what do you want me to do, God? Do you want me to serve faithfully where I am, as David did? For years and years, he spent out in the field tending the sheep. Right? Wouldn't he have wanted to be in a better position? Yet he obeyed every single day, experiencing God, protecting him, being with him, right? Praising God, lifting God with all his heart. Same thing with all these other people. Whenever they faced challenges, difficulties in their life, they did not complain. They did not fall down and say, God, why, why? Instead, they asked God for courage. They asked God for wisdom. They asked God to be with them. And they moved. Yes, you can always do better. But if you're not ready, success will become your poison. If you're not ready, having big bunch of money will destroy you. If you're not ready, your position will only help you fall faster. 준비 안 된 사람이 높은 자리에 올라갔다가 그 권력을 통해서 망하는 걸 얼마나 많이 봤어요. How many times have you seen the unready people somehow get raised to an important position and fall down? How many times have you seen people win or earn a big amount of money, yet they don't know how to spend money wisely, they don't know what to do with it. They end up bankrupt, they end up destroying their lives. What is it in life that you think will help you, my friends? What are you really praying for? Are you praying for success? Are you praying for wealth? Are you praying for health? Are you praying for your well-being? Good. You should be praying for those things. But that shouldn't be the first thing that you pray, isn't it? 성공을 위해서, 재산을 위해서, 어떤 위치를 위해서, 어떤 건강이나 어떤 것들을 위해서 당연히 기도하셔야죠. Of course. But it should not be the first thing that you pray. What should you be praying for then? Very clear. Bible has all the answers, right? Bible says, seek first what? Seek first wealth and success? No, it says seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these other things will be added. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. Esther did not consider herself being in a safe place where she could have been, because she could hide behind her title as a queen. But she knew what was more important. And she understood that despite the threat, despite facing imminent death, she knew she had to go forth. And so all these other people. These are not just very amusing and important and interesting tales, stories. They are there for a reason. Why are they there? To help us to learn from them. Were they all perfect people? No. They all had their faults. They were just like us. If there is a difference, they trusted God. No matter what you're facing in life, my friends, remember that God has placed you there for a reason. So instead of maybe praying, God, deliver me from this problem, right? Get rid of this problem for me. Instead of praying for that, maybe you should be praying, God, what do you want me to do? You have to think and bring home two questions. First, where has God placed you? Where are you in life? If you're facing any difficulties, if you're facing any challenges, why do you think God has put you there? Second, if you're holding back, if you're staying put because you're afraid to move or because you think you can't do anything about the situation, no matter what it might be, if you're delaying the work of God, why do you think so? How do you think it will end? Let us learn from them. Let us take home the lesson that even though they faced impossible situations sometimes, they never ran away from it. They ran straight toward it. Because they were foolish? No, because they understood that God was with them. It comes down to the point, where is your heart? Where is your heart? Is it with God or is it with something else? Simple words saying, if I perish, I perish, changed the course of an entire people. Sometimes we feel like we're at a dead end. Sometimes we feel like there's no solutions. Sometimes we feel like there's nothing that we can do. And maybe you're right. But you're not looking at it from the right perspective, are you? It's not about what you can do. It's about what He wants you to do. Right? 당연히 사람으로서, as people, as ordinary people, there are limits to what we can and cannot do. You're not looking at it with the right perspective. What should we learn from them? That they learned through their problems, they learned through their challenges, they learned that God was with them. They learned that by doing God's work, they were able to accomplish incredible things that they never dreamed of. Let's learn to look at it from God's perspective. How do we do that? By offering God all our problems, all our challenges, all our difficulties, and leaving it up to God. Because He will make a way. Because He will deliver us when it seems like there's a dead end. Because He is our way maker.